when I was in this PCB listening to Robert, I was shocked. I said, I am executive director. I am supposed to be very committed to all the human rights issues and trying to push this agenda. And I am not even knowing a minimum of those unacceptable things which are happening around me. It was shocking for me, and I said again, upsetting to really hear about the stories of Nick and Robert.
My next speaker is going to do something a little different. He's not just going to speak, he has a film which he will introduce himself. But let me tell you a little bit about him. He is Mr. Robert Suttle, and he's an HIV activist and an advisory board member of the Stigma Empowerment Resource Organization. And he himself has personal experience with the issue which we're dealing with today, criminalization of HIV, non-disclosure, exposure, and transmission. And generally, he's been an advocate for the rights of persons living with HIV.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Executive Director, and State Secretary for your warm welcome today. And to all of you, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to address you today. As has been said, my name is Robert Suttle. I am not a criminal. I am not a sex offender, but the state of Louisiana says I am. I will share more about my experience in a moment. But first, I want you to watch a short film about the stories of 3 of us in the U.S. who were prosecuted for failure to disclose our HIV status. I was convicted for failing to disclose to a former partner who went to the police and pressed charges against me when we broke up. I never lied to him about my HIV status. Louisiana, where I'm from, has the highest incarceration rate of anywhere in the world. People of color, especially young black men, are at the highest risk of incarceration and at the highest risk of acquiring HIV. Both represent a terrible injustice, but when you add criminalization, it becomes an injustice of historic proportions. In my case, the prosecutors and the judicial system didn't know much about HIV or the routes and risk of transmission. When they decided to prosecute me, there was no consideration of science or shared responsibility or whether or not HIV was actually transmitted. To avoid a much longer term, I agreed to plead guilty and serve 6 months in prison, and now I must register as a sex offender in Louisiana for 15 years. As you saw in the film, on my driver's license underneath my photograph, it says in large red capital letters, sex offender. So no matter what the government says or what my driver's license says, I know who and what I am. I am fortunate because I have a strong faith in God and a strong support from my family and friends. I am now an HIV prevention specialist at my local AIDS service organization where I work with other young African American men who have sex with men. But what am I supposed to say to these young men who don't want to get tested because they're afraid of getting arrested? What do I say to those who are afraid to disclose because of fear that someone from their past will press charges? I can't tell them it will all be okay. I must tell them about the law and the risk that they take when they get tested or disclose. That's why I'm here today, to implore you to apply reason and science and stop criminalization that stigmatizes those of us with HIV and result in more becoming infected. The solution is not about a conference. It is not about a report. It is not about chuckling our tongues and saying, isn't it awful? The solution is in recognizing HIV criminalization as an obstacle to prevention, and that it really is. The solution is in respecting those of us with HIV and not defining us primarily as potential infectors or viral vectors who must be regulated, controlled, prosecuted, and imprisoned. I've seen a reference to there being about 600 criminalization convictions worldwide. That makes me laugh because I know from data that we've collected through the Cero Project that just in Louisiana, my home state, charges on our state's HIV-specific criminal statute have been filed about 50 times in the last few years. in just one state out of around 35 that have HIV-specific statutes. I know HIV criminalization is a much larger problem than has been reported to date, and at least in the American South, it is growing at a rapid rate. Where I'm from, HIV criminalization is just another way to lock up young black men. It is about racism and homophobia, but not about public health. We can prevent HIV by reducing stigma, or we can prosecute HIV by locking up those of us who have it, but we can't do both. We need your leadership to make sure we take the path that will improve public health and deliver on the promise of justice to every person, including those of us living with HIV. Thank you.